Get all this done. Oh, hey guys. Hey, I didn't see you there. Well, yeah, it's been a few weeks since I've been able to do a video for you guys. So about that, I'm sorry. Life gets crazy. I think I've had probably about 80 customers in that time. So here we are. Life's good. It's just been so busy. I haven't had a chance to make a YouTube video. So today, however, by special request, we're actually going to be making a build video for this customer who just simply wants to know more about what is going into their computer. And they just want to learn about the tech. So we're doing a video for them. Ranae, this one is for you. Anyway, stay tuned because this huge box of parts is going into a really nice case and it's going to be a really nice build. Okay, so for this build, there's quite a few parts in this box. I'm gonna lay them out here on the table, try to give you the best perspective on this. Excuse my desk, it is still a little messy, but that happens when you got a lot of work. And believe it or not, I spent a couple hours cleaning this up last night. So to start out with, we've got an X870E Elite Wi-Fi 7, which you can't see, but there it is. It's an Aorus board. And then for the GPU, customer went with an AMD RX 9070 XT. Now the reason I had them go with that board, or with that GPU, is just because of the fake frames and all the NVIDIA stuff that's been going on lately. Nothing wrong with NVIDIA, but they went with my recommendations for the most part. So this is all going to be what I've recommended as parts to them. And you'd probably see a trend if you've watched enough of my videos. We got a Crucial P310 drive. That's a 4 terabyte. That's the storage drive for games. We've got a Crucial P3 Plus drive. For the actual CPU, we've got the ever powerful and wonderful AMD Ryzen 7 9800X 3D. We've got some G.Skill Trident Z5 memory here. Put that down. Boxes inside of boxes here. We've got an NZXT addressable RGB Kraken 240 for the CPU cooler. And then for the power supply, we've got a Corsair RM1000X. Ever powerful, ever wonderful. Works well. So this is the base of the build today. For the case, it's an NZXT H5 Flow. You guys are familiar with it. It's the case that I've built in the most over the last couple of years. And the reason that we do the H5 Flow is simply it allows a lot of really good airflow for parts like this that really need to breathe. And for a liquid cooler, I don't recommend a case that is just fully enclosed with glass like mine is over here. So we're going to get started with this build, starting with the motherboard. We'll pop the SSD in. I'll pop the RAM in, get the CPU plugged in, and we'll get going from there. So I'm going to scooch the stuff that we're not plugging in right away off to the side, and then we'll get the build rolling. Now, I'm going to add a second perspective to this build for the customer because the customer is, interested in how the build is going to go together. So you're going to see a little tripod on my desk here probably with my little action camera mounted to it as well. You might even get to see that in the frames of this video. I'm not sure yet. We'll figure that out. So to start out with, we'll set that little camera up and we'll get it on its little mini tripod here. Get it turned on. Hopefully there's enough battery to it. I haven't used, again, like any of this for quite a while. So this is the default camera I was using for you guys for a long time, this little mini action cam. And the reason is because it still shoots in 4K, just like the camera that we have here that I'm running currently. Now, the camera upgrade that I got was a Sony Alpha 7 III. And the Alpha 7 III is supposedly a really good camera. However, I think maybe I should have gone with the vlog style camera instead. You live and you learn. I don't know a lot about the digital imaging world, so it's not really, you know, video equipment's not really my specialty. So I try, for sure. It looks like our M.2 slots are toolless, so that's good. That means we don't have to worry about anything with screws. The motherboard has already been opened. Looks like, oh, maybe not. Yeah, it definitely has. All right. We'll lay the motherboard down on top of the box, best place to build, and we'll get started. So I always like to do, as you guys know, I like to do the CPU first, and we're gonna just move this little action cam over to another slot here, another spot, so the customer can see this a little better. There we go. Okay, so we're gonna start out with the CPU as what we install first, just because it's the most delicate part of this whole thing, and you don't wanna bend any pins on the board. So if you're gonna mess it up, best to mess it up early on. And like I said, customer chose to go with the 9800X 3D, which is right now pretty much the premier gaming CPU. So we're gonna slot that in here. Now it lines up with the keyed sections of the CPU socket there, as you can see, based on what the video over here is showing. And we'll go ahead and close that. And then that little clip on top just pops right off. And that's that. The CPU is installed. Slide that back into its container. The socket protector we hang on to because the socket protector is important. If the motherboard ever needs to be RMA'd, that is what it will need to be sent back with. All right. Now I'm gonna flip this around so I have a little bit easier access here. But then we're gonna lift up this primary slot because this is where the primary SSD should go. For the primary SSD, we've got the P3 Plus 1000 gigabyte, and that's gonna slot right in there. But before we get into that, we're gonna take off the plastic. And, well, maybe. There we are. We're taking the plastic off of the thermal pad there. We'll slot that SSD, kick that back. It's got a little, like I said, a little tab that goes into position. And then there's more plastic on the cover, so we'll pull that. And then this essentially slots right back into place. And turn the little tab here for, again, another toolless clip in, and then we'll go to the second slot here. And I am not certain how this new camera is working, or if it even is working well, just because what I see here is kind of telling me that it's not working the greatest. We'll see. We'll see. We have the Bluetooth turned off. We're directly connected to it. So the preview on my phone is not as great. So, okay. So the next SSD we're going to install is the 4 terabyte P310. And the P310 is also a good drive. Crucial in general just makes pretty good SSDs. I tend to trust them. And right now they're still probably one of the lowest cost ones on the market, if you can find them. Western Digital is just being dramatic and marking everything up price-wise. So if you're going to build a computer in this day and age where prices are marked up anyway, steer clear of Western Digital. They're good drives, but they, I think they believe that they have something that nobody else does. And that's just not the case right now. Sometimes these can be difficult, these little toolless covers. There we go. As long as you're careful with them, it's not that big of a deal. So motherboard assembly is nearly complete here. We've got our Trident, our G-Skill Trident Intel XMP ready, but I guess it doesn't really matter. It'll work for our AMD stuff as well. But the Trident Z5 G-Skill RAM, good stuff. Highly regarded in the gaming community too. So. Couple of times I've had run-ins with G-Skill RAM failing, but overall, relatively uncommon. Generally, the failure had to do something with the motherboard or some other component that was just out of whack. So always slots 2 and 4, unless your motherboard manual specifies otherwise. I've worked on this board enough. I know that the motherboard manual does not specify that your optimized slots are anything other than 2 and 4. So always, always, always 2 and 4. When in doubt, 2 and 4. Click those into place. All right. RAM is ready. And there's a nice little sticker in there if you want to put it on the outside of your computer. I'm not one to presume that you want that kind of thing, so I'm just not going to do that. I know I don't really like stickers on my computer, so I'm not just going to assume other people want stickers on theirs. I feel like that's pretty fair. Box all the stuff back up and put it back in the original box down there. The cleaner I can keep my desk, the better this whole process goes. All right, guys, so I'm gonna have to pause the video here because I have to go grab the case, which is still upstairs. And then once I have the case in hand, we'll get the motherboard installed into the case and we'll get everything rolling here. Empty out my magnetic parts tray here and see if I could readjust this camera over here so that we get a little bit better view of what's actually going on over here. All right, guys, so we're back again and we've got the case out here. You probably can't see that based on the view that you're looking at right now, but that's fine. It will happen soon enough. There are some prep steps to take to get things out of the case here. So we're gonna face the tiny camera towards the case so that we can actually have a decent view of what needs to come out of the case. So this case here is an NZXT H5 Flow. I've built many a times in this case, and this case is actually a really nice case. However, one thing I will say, this case is the RGB version of what I normally work on, which basically just means there might be a light bar and some RGB fans inside. Not a big deal, right? So the customer just likes their lights and there's nothing wrong with that. But to start out with, you always want to pop off the back panel, and usually hidden back behind the back panel, down in the bottom of the case, is a box of screws. That box of screws in NZXT cases happens to be held in by a twist tie. That twist tie is a little bit of a bear to get off, but should just be able to pull it, and that's that. And then make sure, oh gosh, make sure that if you're gonna try to get the twist tie out, that you get it out all the way, because you don't want twist tie hanging out in your computer for no reason. I find that very annoying. And we're gonna snip this one, because it's kinked at just the wrong spot there. So that is out. Now we're gonna basically open up the other side, and then we can get started on actually putting the motherboard into the case and then installing everything else. So this case is nice because it has a top that comes off, so it's easier to assemble things. After the motherboard, I typically do the power supply, but on this particular case, I'm going to do the cooler second. That way we know what the power supply, what we need for power supply cables. All right. Beautiful. All right. So now we may switch back to our main view, which is our Sony camera up above, but we're going to lay this back down. That way you can see the inside of the case and we can get started here. Okay? All right. So now I am going to move the tiny camera to a position that somewhat allows for a better view. Maybe. There we go. We're going to have our POV view and then our top-down view basically here. It'll all get stitched together in the end, right? So, all right. So to begin with, every NZXT case is already stubbed out for ATX boards, which works in our favor because in this case, this ATX board will fit exactly where it needs to. We don't have to modify the case at all. Sometimes manufacturers will, builders anyway, will build with those cheaper micro ATX boards, and those end up having to have the standoffs removed or moved around. And then if you ever go to upgrade to an ATX board, you're kind of screwed because you don't have a place to put you don't have any standoffs, and you got to figure out if there's some standoffs are proprietary and fit certain holes, and some are not proprietary and they work just fine with no problems. I don't really like that. I like everything to work the way that it's supposed to. Everything can be equal. If we can just have a standard across standoffs, that would be excellent. NZXT, however, they're one of those manufacturers that has proprietary standoffs, unfortunately. So because they use a special screw for the motherboard. So what's nice though is that their screw packs all come apart fairly easily. They even open fairly easily. But if you don't have one of these nifty little magnetic screw holders, or magnetic parts trays from Harbor Freight, highly recommend them. They are excellent. If I want to work on this, I can literally snap it to the case, and that's that. Now I gotta get on my LTT screwdriver and possibly my shaft extension. It's in here somewhere. There it is. Depending. And we'll get this motherboard screwed in place here. And get out our Phillips bit. And typically there's 9 screws that go in. Some cases have a standoff with a support. Motherboard in vertically and do it that way you can. This one does not appear to be lined up with anything. There we go. Now I think we're in position here. Nope, that's still not going in. What the heck? There we go. There we go. And always tell when it catches, because then the screwdriver actually starts working the way I expect it to. Okay. One's in there nice and tight. Now you don't want to over tighten because you can damage the board if you decide to over tighten your screws into your standoffs. It's unlikely that you'll do that because you'll definitely feel the resistance of the standoff, but don't wrench on it. Don't use a drill. I know that kind of goes without saying a lot of times, but you wouldn't actually believe the number of customers that have brought me a computer that have drilled their board to the case. There we go. A lot of times I'll use my shaft extension for spots like this where it's pretty crooked, where it's hard to get in there. But this case doesn't have a lot of protrusion from the rear, and I think that's a big W for NZXT. Because some of those older cases have a lot of protrusion in the back here, and man, it's annoying. Alright, because you can't even screw or unscrew the GPU, and they don't give you rear access to it. So, alright, let's hit the last bottom one here. And then I think we are missing one. It's right up there next to the power supply power there. Okay. Now you can install all this stuff after you've got the board in the case if you want to, like your CPU and your SSDs if you wanted to, but I just find it way easier to do it this way. And since we already have a setup of our, I guess it looks like one giant fan in the front here, which if you're looking on the Sony cam, you can probably see that because there's a light bar and 3 fans that are just all one unit. In this case, we're not going to be putting the cooler there, which means we have to mount the cooler to the top, which means that anything that needs to be accessed from the top needs to be done next, because the cooler is more than likely going to block access to anything that we have up top. So, and a lot of times I like to mount the cooler to the top first, but in this case I won't, because we have CPU power right here that needs to go in, and so that cooler tends to block that. So we're gonna open up the power supply, pop those CPU power cables in, and then we'll do the cooler on the top. But next up, I'm gonna stand this up here. We're gonna change camera angles, and we'll get you guys a better shot of what's to come. All right, everybody, so as I said, I'm gonna install the CPU power supply cables up here first, just because I think that that's gonna work out better for us long term. And so what we're going to do to begin with is pop open this power supply box, and we're going to get started with actually doing that. So the purpose of this is going to be to just find the CPU power supply cables, which are usually at the very, very, very bottom. I'll leave out the ones that I think we're going to need as well while I'm at it, just because, which we're definitely going to need 2 PCIEs for the 9070 XT. We don't need a third one. This is, hey, a CPU power supply cable. We need one more of those. And number 2. Perfect. All right, we potentially need SATA. I don't know how, I don't think that the pump is actually powered by a SATA connection, but you can never be too sure. So I leave it out just in case. So, as I said, we've got different power supply connections, and it's all written right on the power supply connections if you're new to PC building, exactly what needs to go where. And in this case, it's the CPU power supply cable. So the side that says CPU goes into the actual CPU, or goes into the motherboard here. So always look for the little label that says CPU on it. And then the other side, if you're running a Corsair power supply, we'll usually say like type 4, or it'll have some bogus, some nonsense that you don't really understand on there. So I like to feed these through the back, just because I find it easier. And then you clip them into position up here. And you should always hear a good click when you put your power supply cables in and snap them into place. If you don't hear a click, then it's probably not seated all the way. And if you're building a PC and you don't hear the click, you either have A, a cheap power supply, or B, it's not seated properly. But even some of those cheap power supplies, they still click. Like the Apivia ones they put in your iBuy power builds from Best Buy. There we go. Or Apiva or Apeva or whatever that is. All right, so now you can see we've got our CPU power supply connector connected here. So now we can start the process of actually connecting up the NZXT Kraken. And the reason I left it for later, like I said, is just because it's honestly one of those things that it has to be put up here at this point. Because this whole thing is a single fan unit, and it's already mounted to the front, and I'm not going to modify that because ultimately it has 3 fans, and it'll look really good there. So not wanting to mix it up too much inside the case, you know, want to actually do a good job for the customer. We went with a 240 because a 360 I feel like would be overkill for this. It is just a 9800X 3D. You could even get away with a good air cooler, like a good Noctua NH whatever. And it does look like it has a SATA power supply, so to power the RGB stuff. And then we've got a USB cable that runs back to the board, and then we've got our actual pump and radiator assembly here. So I'm not mad that I pulled a SATA cable out of there now, because, well, now we've got it, and I don't have to dig through the power supply box for it. Moving on. So to start with, most of these are spec'd out by default for Intel because, well, apparently people buy more Intel than they buy AMD, which I don't know if I really believe that anymore, but, you know, some people do, so. And if my camera gets bumped here, I'm sorry. My dog is like right next to it, so. And this is the problem with building a computer during work hours and trying to film any video. Someone always tries to call, but I have to ignore it during this time. I'll give them a call back later. So as I said, this is the pump assembly right here, and so directly around this pump assembly you see the bracketry here, and that bracket is for your Intel, as I said, your Intel CPUs. But because we're using an AMD CPU, we need to use a different bracket on this, which will be just fine. It's fairly straightforward, pretty easy to put in, and generally they're not bad at all. The pinouts are not the pinout, but the 4 screws here that hold in these brackets that are already attached to the board, those just basically get replaced, so no big. All right, so what you do here, you just take this, undo it, and there's instructions on here that say, oh, it matters as far as what side goes down and what side goes up. It really doesn't. They're pretty equal, but they like to say that, so I always like to keep it in the configuration that they say, which if you look really closely at this particular standoff, this is a standoff that goes, so you've got your screws here, so essentially you'll have this new double-sided screw, and the more coarse threaded side goes right into the board, and then the thinly threaded side goes, well, on here, and then there's a screw that screws on to retain it. But then this actually sits over top of it like a cap, or not like a cap, sorry, yeah, like a cap. So when that screw comes in, it'll screw right through there, and you'll be good. So that's just what it is. So, and actually I think it goes like this, so it pokes out like that. But I have to start by actually removing the brackets that are in there right now, and then we can go from there. Don't be surprised, because sometimes if my phone rings, my doorbell rings shortly afterwards. So it's an annoying fact of working in the industry that I work in, but I have people that get angry with me because I don't answer my door right away, and they don't understand that sometimes I'm in the middle of something like this that requires my full attention. So they don't really understand that there's a need to kind of be, I could have this held up with one hand and like trying to screw screws in, and then my doorbell rings, and then I have to wait like, they have to wait like 2 or 3 minutes, and that's the end of the world. So but they don't know because they can't see. I work out of my home office here, so it's not like I'm in a storefront or anything. All right. So pretty straightforward. I've got 2 of these out already. We're taking the other 2 out right now. All right. And then I always just hand tighten these because there's not really a way to grip any threads or screw them in tighter. It's not really necessary because once you've got this, once you've got the actual pump assembly mounted, you don't really need to worry about that anyway. So. All right. So we've got the rib side of the standoffs facing upwards towards us. And then what we have to do is this bracket comes off, the square one, and this round one goes on, okay? So now we just make sure that the round one meets the bolt pattern here, and we're good on that. So the next step is basically trying to kind of test fit how you want this to go in. And if we keep the pipes at the bottom, that's fine. They could also go sideways. That's going to be a little harder to do, but it's still doable. But I kind of like to keep the pump, like the hoses face down. Some people disagree, but the cable, if the cable comes out the top and the pump, like the actual hoses come out the bottom, then I tend to think that that works pretty well. Bottom or side, don't ever put it on the top. I think that's where it gets, that's where your pump's going to struggle a little more. So. And then, I don't know if you guys saw that. I'm sorry if I'm moving a little too fast, but the assembly here basically just twists off and then twists on to the next, like the bracket just twists off and then it twists back on. So what we're gonna do now, the reason I'm trying to avoid touching the bottom is because thermal paste is already applied here. So we don't have to worry about applying thermal paste to this because from the factory, these liquid coolers typically have the thermal paste pre-applied. So we do have to set this down because the actual screws that hold everything into place here are in with some Intel brackets. There goes the phone again. They'll figure it out. Or they won't, and they'll call 3 more times. That's the hard part about trying to do YouTube and have a day job is YouTube is great and I love teaching you guys things, but it definitely gets in the way of the day job in ways that and the day job is the way I support myself. So I don't really have, see, they're relentless. This is what I deal with every day when I don't answer my phone right away. They're like, why not answer? And so we pop that on, pull it back off. You guys can see that it applied that thermal paste already to the CPU. And then what I like to do is just start threading each of these little thumb screws on. And then once you get the top right and the lower left on, it's a little easier to manage the rest of them. You don't have to get them on all the way, just enough to hold it onto the socket. And then you can start screwing everything else in place here. So you have one there. And then the hardest one's obviously going to be where the hoses come out because, you know, it has to be that way. So what I'm going to do is tighten these down so we don't get a lot of give on that. Not really tightening it down, just screwing it, well, because I'm not actually meeting any resistance at the moment because everything's still so loose. Gosh. Call me 4 more times, please. See, guys, the business is good. But yeah, when I don't answer my phone, they think that I'm intentionally dodging their calls. Or that I'm open, I should be answering my phone. And yeah, that's true, but I also am trying to work too. So, but yeah. All right, so that looks really good, actually. I think that, that turned out really well. And the fact that this is all one giant assembly is actually really helpful for us, because that means that we can have a pump setup that's going to be not interfering with fans. Sometimes these hoses of the AIO can not really cause problems, but they kind of can get caught up in fans, and that's not really what we want. So try to avoid that if at all possible. All right, so now we have to put our fans on the radiator. This is the part that usually takes a while, just because there's a lot of little screws that go from the fans into the radiator. And then we have to screw the radiator up to the top, and it's a whole thing, guys. A whole thing. Oh, they had that like knotted. The twist tie was knotted in with the wires somehow, and I don't understand. I really don't understand why the wire was even twisted that much. I hope this fan actually works, because that's the signal cable for, oh, that's the RGB signal cable. I think the customer would be really disappointed if the RGB didn't work on one of the pump fans. All right, so it's going to mount this way, so that means that we need to have our pump fan go this way. And we're going to route that towards the middle, because if you look real closely here, you can see on this case that the blank space sits right above the motherboard and nowhere else up above. So we don't really want to route the fan cables towards the front of the case. We want to route it towards that back, so everything can kind of run up through that empty space up there. And then all we have to do is flip this over and mount it to the radiator. And then we're going to do the same exact thing with the secondary fan here, the second radiator fan, which we'll get that done in a second here. I'm going to pull all the screws out here. Well, I don't really want to pull all the screws out, but we'll pull out the big ones, because the big ones are what we need. Okay. Again, I like to tighten in a cross pattern. You don't have to tighten in a cross pattern on a radiator. It just helps alignment when you're putting your fans on your radiator if you tighten in a cross pattern. You know, because if you get one corner and then you get the other, you know you're well aligned. All right, and that's it. Should we have a count as to how many times the phone's going to ring while we're building this computer? Nobody on my business phone tries to reach me for an emergency, so everything that's going on right now, they can be called back. And that might mean that I lose a lead or two, but I've got a lot of them in anyway. So if I do that, it's not like I don't care. I do like my customers, and I do want the work, and I'm very blessed to have the work. Don't get me wrong, but I have to be able to do the work. That's the thing. I can't take on more than I can handle. But if you guys go out and you look up BG Tech Repair, I'm well reviewed because I take care of my customers well. And that's just kind of how I like to live. I like to take care of my customers, and, you know, I want people to have a positive experience when they come here. So by not answering the phone, I'm not denying them that experience. I'm simply going to call them back after this is done. And sometimes I'll check my phone and it's a call from like 4 or 5 different people. Sometimes I'll check my phone and it's 6 calls from one person. So that's what you're up against too, is you've got a lot of determined people that don't want to work with like Best Buy or another local computer repair person here in town, who I will not name, but they'll work with me. And so they're determined to talk to me to get their issue fixed as soon as possible, because, you know, when technology doesn't work, and I mounted these backwards. You see how these fan cables are facing? Oh, no, I didn't mount them backwards. I knew what I was doing. Because what we want is the radiator hoses to face the front. And then basically all these fan cables route down to the back, where they'll plug into this hub right here and be powered with RGB, and then they'll run to the board and that kind of thing. So I didn't do it wrong. Man, I doubt myself a lot when I do this stuff, and I really should stop, because I've been doing this for years now. But sometimes I do get talking and I feel like I wind up having to redo my work, and I don't want to have to redo my work, you know what I mean? So from this point, the radiator mounts up to the top. And at this point, I am going to dump out the rest of the screws, but we're going to be real careful, because these screws are going to take they're tinier screws, because they don't have to be big, but they take washers and they screw right into the top of the PC. So I like to start, like I said, with 2 screws every time, and then we'll alternate where they're mounted. And you guys won't be able to see the top mount, because it's just not what we're working on right now. And that has to be okay. I have a top-down camera, but that's only for live streams. And we're not live streaming this one. Recording it so I can do it later. There we go. So we've got 1 screw here with a washer attached to it. We're going to screw that radiator right in there. And you'll see that the radiator hangs here, but it's at a bit of an angle, and that's where the second screw comes in. And so because we're in a little bit of a weird spot here right now, because I tightened this one up a little bit too tight, so I'm going to have to untighten. So we can slide this way a bit, because it's all about where it mounts too, and that matters. So if we can loosen up the screws, we can get all these things into a mounting position here where the holes line up. Because you might want it to be right at the front of the case or right at the back of the case to look nicer aesthetically, but the reality of it is that it's not always made that way. It's oftentimes made so that it functions over how it looks. All right, so that's essentially what the computer is going to look like. Liquid cooler mounted to the top like that, and then we'll get the rest of the screws put in. We're not just going to do 2 of them, but we got to washer up some screws. And the reason we do washers is so we don't damage the case, or so the screws don't penetrate through the actual mounting holes on the case. And the CPU power connections are still visible there in the actual case. So I probably could have still done those, but I have big hands and they don't really fit super well in there. So that's another part of what I have to bear in mind when I'm working on things like this. So, but putting those cables in immediately has been a huge help for me. Okay. Now I've got all the washers on all the little screws. We're going to get this going here. I think this is low on battery, our point of view camera. Nope, we're good on battery. And we even still have 28 minutes of recording time. So We can get through it in that time. Somebody sent me a picture on my business phone. So I can monitor my text messages on my computer from my business phone because I've got, it's not iMessage, but it's the Google Messages application that you can download. When you have a browser like Edge or Chrome, you can use that functionality. Pretty nice. And here I thought I was going to run out of screws, but just enough, because it's usually how they do it. They give you more washers than they do screws. All right, so the radiator's officially mounted, which means I can put the top plate back on, because I don't really have anything else to do up towards the top of the case here now. Only other thing I can see being a problem, which I should have thought about before I mounted the radiator, and I always forget to, is I have to plug in my CPU fan headers. And of course there's a splitter here for it. And of course my big hands aren't going to fit back there. So we're going to have to drop the radiator again to get to it. Usually something I forget. Alright, so we've got SATA power here for something. I don't really know what the purpose of that is. Oh, that's for the pump assembly itself. Oh, this is all one giant thing, isn't it? Okay. This is a signal cable. This mounts to the top of that. I gotcha. I gotcha. Alright. Well, we'll come in from the top. Like I said, we'd have to do anyway. So this is the cable assembly that kind of ties all of this together. And essentially what happens from this point is this big cable here goes into the top of the radiator, or into the top of the pump assembly, because it's where it gets its power from. And you push that in there, and that snaps into position. And then there are CPU fan headers, but they're up under the radiator now. So I have to, like I said, unmount the radiator again and run the CPU signal cable, which is this teeny tiny little cable that just comes off that cable cluster that we just put in. Unless I can get my fingers in there and magically put it in, which is usually my struggle. So it probably won't happen that way. So I got that CPU signal cable down into the case now. My finger is not tiny enough to get up there. So yeah, radiator's coming down. Such a disappointment, because it's not the hardest thing in the world to do, but it's the least logistically fun thing to do when you're working on this. I kind of like to have the radiator in position here. So what I'm going to try here, because it's something that's kind of worked for me in the past, is I'm going to take a long screw, like one of the leftover screws that typically go through the fans, and I'm going to stick it in the hole over here so that when the radiator drops, it won't drop down all the way. It'll just drop enough for me to get in there and pivot the radiator without damaging anything. And if that doesn't make any sense, I'm sorry. It'll make sense once I show you. You can see how that screw's still sticking up out of the top of the case there, probably. Yeah, we can. All right. Moment of truth. There we go. So we got our pivot screw. So the radiator doesn't have to fall all the way down. And I don't have to redo it completely. So again, we take this little cable, push it on there, try to turn our screwdriver back the way it's supposed to be. Screw the pump assembly back up, and we've already got one screw into position, so that decreases the difficulty of everything. And then all we have to really do is realign the holes again, and that's that. So the pivot screw is the winning concept. It is probably, I don't know. If you build PCs, tell me if you use the pivot screw method, because if you make a mistake, I think that the pivot screw is very helpful. It's something I started doing recently, so I can't even say that it's been a long time thing, but it's certainly come in handy for me. Right. And that's done. Easy peasy. All right, so the next step is we got to flip this around, and we got to work on the wiring on the backside for the pump assembly that we just threw in there and put all together. So I'm going to take these screws that I took out of this little package. I'm going to put them back. Well, I'm going to put them back in the package. I lost one, which is totally me. Dropping screws. Here it is. All right. That's done. Now, I do have a call coming in at 2, but it's only 10:30, so we got plenty of time, guys. We'll get this build done. In fact, we're most of the way done right now. We got the SSDs, the RAM, everything in. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this off right now, because we're not going to have to deal with that again. And then in that way, now we have no fingerprints on the little LCD that comes up there, because there's no reason for us to touch that pump assembly again. All right, so let's turn this around. Ooh. And we'll have a look at what's going on back here. So these are your CPU power cables that we connected from the outset. This is our big weird cable assembly thing that comes off of the pump, and you can see there's 3 fan connection options here. And so what we basically do is we take these two fan connections that are for the fan, and we hook them up here. They kind of standardize this so that you don't have to, like if you get the 360 version, they standardize it so that you don't have to worry about, like, it's basically for their supply purposes, I think. So that's that. And then we still have our RGB portions of those fans hanging right here. And now we've got a SATA power cable connection here. So what we need to do, another phone call. What we need to do is take this power station here that has a SATA power connection, and this is for the RGB. All right, we got USB and SATA. And so we can take our little RGB connections that come off the back here that are just kind of floating over here, and you just plug them in. No big deal. No fuss, no muss. RGB 1, RGB 2. And now what I like to see is this whole assembly in the front here that runs RGB. I want to see if it's the same RGB connection, because if it is, I'll just plug it into the same assembly. And with NZXT, they tend to standardize things, so it would not surprise me if there's one cable and one RGB. Yep. So there's one cable for all the fans, which is the same kind of cable that goes to the splitter. So I'm actually going to set the front fan cables to synchronize with the, and you don't have to do it this way, it's just the way I like to do it. I'm going to set the front fans to synchronize with the CPU, and then I'm going to set the RGB cable into the splitter here that came with the pump. So that way our RGB matches up and everything matches up. And then all of this will run on a USB hub. It's right here. So you've got USB connection and then a SATA power connection right there. So the SATA power connection is necessary, and then for both of the items here, the pump assembly as well as the RGB connection. So we'll power those with that one SATA cable, and then we've got our front fans running off of it. So realistically, we just took care of this whole entire front fan assembly and the pump assembly. The only fan that's really not hooked up to anything right now is that rear fan, which is just sitting right here, and it's because it's going to be a system fan. I'm actually going to set that to be an exhaust fan for everything. So anyway, that's that. So now the other miscellaneous connections that you saw here, these are your you've got your HD audio, which runs to the back of the case right here, and it runs your audio jacks on top. And then you've got your USB 3.0, your USB-C, and then your front panel connectors for your reset and your power and all that, and your hard drive light and your activity light and all that jazz. A lot of times it's not a big deal to hook those connections up. It's fairly simple. But my next step here is not actually going to be hooking up those board connections. I don't know if I've been recording this whole time or not, so I kind of hope so. But I think I might have forgotten to push the button on that one, so I apologize. So I guess if the tabletop camera dying is what it took to get that recording, then so be it. Anyway, so what we're gonna do next is get the power supply out of the box, and we're gonna start running connections. We already have the power supply cables out. We just need to get the actual power supply out now. Now, if I wasn't explaining this, I could probably have this build done in about 45 minutes with the RGB connections and everything like that, but realistically, I have to do this in a way that, you know, everyone understands, because it's for YouTube. So I sacrifice a little bit of my time that way when I make these videos, but you know, if it helps a customer and it helps them to be confident in the work that I've done, then I'm happy with that. All right, so the first cable that I like to connect up when I do this is the big 24-pin connector. This is your main board power. And I like to tug it a little bit so that you get it nice and straight, because these things come wound up and it can be a little harder to cable manage. They're already somewhat difficult to cable manage because they're not, I kind of miss the plastic ones, the like plastic feel. These new ones kind of tend to strand a lot like this. Like, I'm not a big fan of that, but it's the design that Corsair chose, so we roll with it because it's what we get, you know? All right. Look at all this mess that this one cooler made on the desk. This is why I perpetually have messes everywhere. All right, so we've got SATA power here. That'll power our pump and our RGB assembly. And then we've got our PCIe connections here. Now the PCIe connectors are for our graphics card. And they're a little easier to tell which end goes at the power supply because the cable actually splits, or the actual end of it splits for PCIe connections down towards the end that goes by the motherboard. The board end. Okay. Alrighty. And now, obviously, we have these two connections here that need to be plugged in, and these are our CPU power. So I'll plug those in right here. And then now we can take our power supply, which is a 1,000-watt power supply, pull everything out of the way that way, and we can slide our power supply into the bottom. And you guys might think that 1,000 watts is overkill, and you might be right. I personally like 1,000 watt power supplies because of the fact that they have more. Yeah, and so I got to mount this the other way. The other thing that you'll realize too when you do this is that cases, certain cases make it so that you have to put your power supply in a certain way. And there's nothing really wrong with that. The holes still line up. It's just, it might be a little more difficult to reach if you've got a cheapo power supply anyway. Most power supply cables are pretty standard and you won't run into that problem, like standard in length. But I've come across a couple that are just a little too short. So it's been like 1 or 2 in the entire time I've been building computers, which has been a long time at this point in my career. Well, one thing about potentially not recording is that, you know, we may have run into a situation where the audio is not as good for a bit, so I'm sorry about that, but everybody makes mistakes. At least the visuals were good on it. I know that much. Also, the lighting was weird on this camera for a bit. So what we're doing now, we're just screwing in the power supply. Power supply is an often fairly overlooked aspect of a build because people don't think it's really that important, and I think it's arguably probably the most important because a cheap power supply can take everything with it if something bad happens. You know, if you have, I've had it here where my power has flickered, and if I didn't have a Corsair power supply, it would just be done, or my whole computer would just be done. And the reason that I say that with confidence is because I've had a number of people in here that just say, oh, my power only flickered. We didn't get a surge. We didn't lose power for any length of time. It just went off real quick and came back on. And I'll tell you, most power supplies that are worth their metal anyway, are going to be able to withstand something like that. Most power supplies that are not worth it will not be able to withstand such things. I forgot a screw in the pump assembly up top, or not the pump assembly, in the radiator up top. So we're gonna pop that in here real quick. I just noticed it sitting on the desk and I'm like, I forgot something. All right, perfect. All right. So now we have a whole huge mess of cables back here. So what do we do? Well, we're gonna have to cable manage. That's a given with anything like this. You have to cable manage. If you don't, you run into pretty nasty, hairy situations. So this, like I said, and this is why I don't like this new style. The old CPU cables, they were 2 strands. They'd come down. And now if you look at this CPU power connection that runs up to the back of the case, it looks like hairs spreading out. And so now they provide you all these wonderful zip ties when you get your power supply to help you cable manage, but now you have to use the zip ties just to hold the freaking cables together so that they don't look ridiculous and they don't spread out and interfere with everything. So let's do that real quick. There we go. My favorite design of power supply cable is actually the sleeved cables. I think the sleeved cables are awesome. Those are the best, and they're the least cheap, and they don't feel like they're gonna snap on you. But a sleeved cable is, it's great. You can see this is starting to look a little better already because I'm doing just zip tying this together. I'm doing it about every 3 to 4 inches because right now my priority is just to make it look better. And then obviously, you know, we've got this here and the SATA connection, and then we've got this PCIe connector, and the PCIe connectors, we just need to get out of the way because we're not going to be using them right away. They're like one of the last things that goes on in the case here. So we're going to tuck those down over here off to the side. And then we're going to make sure our SATA connections are hooked up for power for our, oh my gosh, for our RGB hub and for our pump assembly. All right, so SATA power to there. SATA power to there. Okay, so now that our SATA power is hooked up, we can actually take this whole hub and start zip tying that together to cable manage it out of the way. And there's just one little USB cable that comes off of it, so it's not that big of a deal either. But yeah, there's a lot of, you can see there's a lot of excess fan cabling here that we can tidy up and that kind of thing. So we'll try to do our best with that. Again, there's not really a science to it. You just kind of have to do the best you can and make it look as good as you can for a customer. All right. So we've got that, and then once all this is cable managed, there's actually a cable management channel right here. But to start with, this is what needs to run through that cable management channel. So this is the power supply connection for that 24-pin power connector. And I'm not going to show you how this connects because it's just a power supply connection. It's not that big of a deal. But I'm going to just bring it through and connect it while it's here. There we go. Then I can pull the extra cable back through. And then what we're going to do is take this cable that we've just run through there, wrap it behind here, strap her down. You might be like, why are you doing that? Well, I'm doing that because this is one of the biggest, thickest cables on the entire motherboard, and it's important that it's held in position. Not really because there's a risk of it moving or coming off, but it's really annoying on the backside, like perpetually annoying because of its girth. And there's not really a better way for me to put that, so I'm sorry for the terminology, but because of its girth, it has to be placed in such a way that it's easier to manage like that. So now you can see that that's in position, and all the other cables can kind of fall into position like that as well. Like I said, the RGB connections here and everything like that. There goes the freaking phone again. USB connection needs to go to the board. So we'll fish that through, and then we'll cable manage once everything's connected to the board. Got a lot of needy folks today. All right. Now that our USB connection is connected to the board, the hub is fully connected, we're good there. So we've got our SATA connection is here as well. So what I'd like to do ultimately is take all of this and wrap it like this. I'm not sure how that got turned backwards, but I want that to stay facing outward like that. We're going to toss a zip tie on all this so that it's all in one big clump. There we go. There's the top part is zip tied together now. All these bottom cables are about to come together. Everybody wants a clean look, right? And that's overall what we're going to go for here. It doesn't look very clean right now, and that's understandable. Our PCIe power connections need to run underneath and come up for the graphics card. So we'll fish those through here. That way they're out of the way of what we're doing here in the backside. And then now we're going to take all these things that we've just zip tied together. We're going to see if we can pull the zip ties towards the front if we can. And then we're going to include them in the cable bundling that we've done for the the big 24-pin power supply cable. Now, again, this may not be the way you do things, and that is okay. We all build computers differently, and I'm a firm believer in doing it the way you like it. I build in a way that I feel is going to be most efficient and that will look best for the customer and that will provide them a pretty serviceable build. I don't typically, if I can avoid it, do a ton of zip ties because I hate them. I hate having to clip like 20 zip ties just to get to a fan connection if I have to replace a bad fan. But in some circumstances, such as this one, where we've got SATA power connections and we've got all these cables that run for the RGB, RGB really adds a lot of complexity to everything. It looks really nice though, so that's why people like it. All right. Again, we've got that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this cable here at the bottom, run it through here, and then that will pull everything pretty nice and tight through here. And I broke it. Awesome. Sometimes that happens. So yeah, so the bottom strap snapped when I tried to pull it tight. So it just means we got a lot of cabling in there. It's not the end of the world. This will all still go together and it will be no problem. What I'll do is I'll just tuck as much as I can up here towards the middle. And I believe the case actually came with some extra tassels like that. Maybe not. That's okay. It's just a Velcro strap, and I've actually got Velcro straps. You know what? Let me replace it. I've got the LTT Velcro straps. If you guys watch any tech YouTube, you know that already, that Linus makes those cable management straps anyway. Where I keep them is another question. Usually they're back here in one of my drawers. Yeah, don't currently see them. That's okay. All right, so let's flip our attention from this here, which currently looks like a mess because there's so many little tassels coming off. We'll snip those off here, like so. There we go. And we'll change our focus to connecting things up to the motherboard because it's realistically what's next. So we need to do our front I/O and get our rear fan exhaust, like our rear exhaust fan, connected there as well. That's a good idea. We got some 3M tape that we can put on the back of that RGB hub there, so I'm going to leave that out just because we can use it. And if we don't wind up using it, then so be it. It's not like that RGB hub is really doing anything. It's just there to connect it all together and then connect all that to the motherboard. So in some older cases, you'd have an RGB hub like that you actually had to push buttons on. A Thermaltake was a really good example of that. I think I had a Thermaltake RGB hub that did that. So just trying to keep my workspace here clean, which is important because we're almost done. I'm gonna leave those out for the time being. All right. Okay, so what you see here, this is the USB 3.0, this is HD audio, this is your front panel connection, and this is your USB-C. They're all tied together here with a twist tie towards the front of the case that we're going to untwist. That way we can have those cables be just a little bit more loose. And because we already ran the RGB cable and the fan cable there, it's kind of preventing some movement. So HD audio has to reach all the way to the back, which is why I like to do it this way. And typically this is a cable that I will put in front of all the other ones here. It's just kind of like the cable that ties it all together at the end. But we're gonna feed that through the back end. I just have to make sure it's actually going into the case. There it is, okay. And then our USB-C and our USB 3.0 is gonna be the next connection. And sometimes I hook those up. I hook up the USB 3.0 from the back because it's usually facing towards the back anyway, like facing towards, it's literally plug in from this direction. So that's why I'm doing it this way, because it just makes it easier. There's a little, well, you can see kind of a baffle here that is supposed to protect like your cable management and things like that. And that kind of sits in the way. So I like to move that out of the way. And then we've got our USB-C, which again is one I'm going to connect from the back. It doesn't have to connect from the back. It's just easier to do so. It's a bit of a tricky connection too, because it's always like upside down. It's kind of like a regular USB plug in that you try it one way, it doesn't go in, don't force it. Try it the other way, it'll work fine. And then we've got our front panel connector, which I'm going to shove up through that PCIe, where I've got the PCIe cables coming out of, because the front panel connection is right there. And then what I'll do for you guys, I'm going to flip this whole unit around so you can see what the front looks like now that we're getting things connected up to the board. All right. So, and then we can do some work here to make it look a little prettier in the front here. So we've got that 24-pin connector. Just push that back, and it looks a little better that way. And then our front panel connection needs to go right here. Very simple to plug in, but I don't want it to be right in the middle of my PCIe cables. So I need to figure out how that got in there and get it out of there. I like to keep those cables separate. Okay. All right. And then your HD audio cable goes clear to the back. Plugs in right there. All right. So I'm going to put that top cover back on like I said I was going to. And that little CPU cable, that little CPU signal cable for the fans and the pump likes to pop its head up here. There we go. We can slide that into place and screw it back into position. Now this has a dust filter over it, so anything that gets sucked up or sucked through or whatever is going to automatically just get sucked into that dust filter, so that the customer doesn't really have to worry about, all they have to do is remove the top panel, blow it out, and they're good to go. So really all that's left of this build to do is to plug in the graphics card, which is sitting in a box over there. So I'm gonna go grab that really quick and I'll be right back. All right guys, so the graphics card is now sitting on top of the computer. As you can probably see, it's still in its plastic wrapping here. However, the graphics card came with a box that says accessories. And if I know anything about graphics card accessories, that means that, well, the graphics card's a beefcake, so it needs some support and love to hold it up so that it doesn't actually damage the motherboard if the computer gets moved, which in our case, it's definitely going to get moved because it has to be transported home. So what we're going to do is take a look at what we have on this, in this accessory bag here, and we'll see how that connects up to the graphics card. So it looks like what we have is a simple bracket that's going to run underneath of the graphics card, the length of the graphics card, to help keep it supported. And then it looks like maybe it screws in somewhere, or it tightens up down here. So nothing too crazy. Looks like it's going to be a fairly straightforward thing. Now the graphics card is, again, arguably one of the most important components of your build. Probably, I would say, the third most important component of your build, because it is what provides video signal to your monitors. And without them, if you, well, not in this case, because these AMD cards have integrated graphics these days. But not all AMD cards do have integrated graphics. And when I say cards, I mean processors. So if that terminology, again, is confusing to you, I'm sorry. It's just industry lingo, realistically. So gotta pull all the silly peels off of here to begin with, because you don't want the peels interfering with the operation of the thing. And I get why they put it on there, for protection. A lot of people like doing this to their new cards. They like doing the peels and stuff because it's just so satisfying. If it was my own card, I think I'd feel that way. I did when I put my 7900 XT or whatever into my build out in my theater room, which I'm going to be probably recasing a couple of my builds here soon, including my video rig that you guys are seeing behind the shot here. And the reason being is I really want better airflow. I have this H510 Elite case, which is a really nice case, mind you, but it does have, the one issue that I have with it is that it doesn't have great airflow. And so I'm trying to get around that. Okay, so all the peels are now off of the graphics card here. And this graphics card is going to fit just fine inside the case here. And it's not going to really interfere with anything. You've got your USB-C connection that's pushing on it a little bit, but it's not that bad. And again, I like to test fit just to see how many slots is it going to take up and which slots I need to remove here for being able to actually get this connected. And it looks like it is a 3-slotter. So we're going to have to take out slots 2, 3, and 4 here. And then we've got an additional 3 slots where the support bracket needs to screw in. So we're going to start by pulling off this back slide cover here. It's meant to kind of keep everything in position. Never really liked those, but they put them on there anyway. We're actually going to have to take out all 6 screws. because the support bracket has to go in the bottom 3 slots. So some cases do come with a support bracket built into them. Those are pretty nice cases. This is more of a budget-friendly option. So if you want to spend $300 on a case and get that option, by all means, please do, because it's not the end of the world to have to install a bracket like this, but it does take up slots in the back of your PC like this one's going to. And so it can be a factor for people, you know. All right, so that's slotted in there. And actually, that's really not that bad. There's not really a lot of give to that either when when you install it. So I'm still gonna put that bracket on there just because I want my customer to be happy with, you know, and feel safe that it's supported. But I do think that it would be okay if it wasn't used. Of course, it's all about long-term strain on the motherboard and how that's going to work out. So, okay, and the last screw here. Now, let's see how this is going to factor in here. Should have probably factored it in a little sooner. It looks like it's maybe supposed to be installed alongside of the GPU, like it's supposed to be installed with the GPU. I'm going to slide it so I don't damage the card, and I'll slide it under, like right here. It looks like that's where it's supposed to go. So it screws in conjunction with my goodness, okay. Sorry guys, I'm just still trying to figure this out here. It screws in conjunction with 2 of the 3 screws plus a slot below. So we're going to take out the slot below screw here to begin with. It's usually pretty easy to tell what slots these go, like how the support brackets go in. In this case, not so much. I mean, it was easy to tell that it goes parallel to the card. Some of them go perpendicular to the card and screw into the end, but this one, it was not the case with this one. Okay, so we got the 3 screws out now. We can take our graphics card support bracket and actually get it screwed in there. Maybe. I'm not a big fan of the parallel ones, the ones that go parallel to the card like this. I don't think that they're that great. They do provide some support, so, or they at least provide peace of mind. I am of the impression that if you're going to have a support bracket, it should be at the end where the support's needed, not originate down at the other end, but that's just me. Okay, it's looking pretty good. It's not having to really shove up on anything too much, so I think we're doing okay here. I'll do the second screw in here. And last but not least, we've got our third support bracket screw here. It goes right through the bottom. All right, so now our GPU is installed. It is not really that supported, but it's supported. And everything's looking pretty good in here, I would say. So now all we have to do is take our PCIe slot, or PCIe connections, and plug those directly into the graphics card, which these are still a standard, what is it, 8-pin connection. And again, every time you have a power supply connection, it should click. It should click. All right, so that bottom bracket, like where that screw went in, I'm gonna actually put one of these spacers back in there, because I really don't like it looking blank back there. And I think that we can have a spacer in there without causing issues with the graphics card. So we're gonna do that. Because to me, it's about the time and the effort and the care that you put into it. And I would want a build that looks like it's supposed to. You know, somebody's showing up unannounced at my door. See, I told you that would happen. I have no appointments today. No one's supposed to be coming by, but they are anyway. All right, that's in there. Now I have to pause and go answer my door. I'll be right back, guys. All right, guys, I'm back. Sorry about that. Customer showed up at the door because apparently I still had an SSD of theirs, but either way. Okay, so what we have going on here now is more of that cable stranding I told you I hated. And so I'm gonna fix that real quick with a couple of zip ties. Just make it look better. I'm going to tie these two cables together. And we're going to put that around back so it doesn't really show. We'll clip off that back. We'll clip off the excess there. I'm just putting the actual zip tie part towards the back so you can't see that it's a zip tie. It just looks like it's part of the cable. I'm not sure why Corsair decided to go with this design. I mean, it's certainly less brittle than the previous generation. Like it feels less brittle, feels less cheap. But I can't say I'm a fan. Okay. All right, so that's done. This PC build is effectively done, with the exception of a Windows install. So now what we'll do is we'll take kind of the excess PCIe cabling that we have here. And the reason I didn't want that front panel connection tied up with it is because I didn't want to have to deal with accidentally pulling that out when we go to pull the extra back. Because you always want to pull the extra back to keep it looking nice. Pull it back, pull it back. Now this isn't that silly 12-volt NVIDIA connector, so you don't have to worry about the slight bend in the PCIe cable at the graphics card, because it's not going to come apart on you. It's not going to start a fire. There we go. And we can push that into the drive bay. We gotta manage our fan here because we have our rear exhaust fan. We never did hook up to a system fan header, so we're gonna do that real quick here. And because I didn't do it right away, it's gonna make it just a smidge more difficult, but it's not the end of the world. The reason it's a smidge more difficult is simply because, well, when you get the graphics card in here, there's not a lot of room to work with. Let me look for I'm gonna look for a system fan header along the top rail here. And I'm not dropping that radiator again, so we're gonna go at it through the bottom. That's the move, regardless. I can do it, it's just not ideal because I usually run out of light, and when you have black cables in a black case, it's just real hard to see. It's like if you were to try to go into a cave without a light and plug in something. Very difficult. All right. Well, that's all done. That's connected. So we're good to go. At this point, I can put my back panel on, which I'm gonna do since I'm here. And then I'll put the front panel on. We'll get windows installed, and this build will be done. So let me just make sure that this actually goes on, because I'm well cable managed on the back side here, but you never know. Still, cables get chunky and they poke out different places, so. There we go, that's not too tough. And pretty easy. Pretty easy. That's a pretty sharp build, if you ask me. I think that looks really good. So I think my customer's gonna be really happy with it. Renee, I hope you're happy with this build. Get it home and you know, get it all hooked up, and hope it works really well for you. You got a really nice setup here. So, all right, I'm gonna do what Linus says he never does, and I'm gonna put the panel on. Well, he does do it, and that's why he says to never do it. I'm gonna put the panel on, and I'm gonna be cocky enough and say, I think we got everything right the first time. Because realistically, I don't remember any mistakes on this thing. The front doesn't want to go down where it's supposed to. For some reason. There we go. Now we're in. There. Beautiful. Beautiful. All right. I'm going to get it on the bench. We're going to install windows, and this build's all done. If you like this video, then please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because, well, I love making these videos. And while it's been a few weeks and I'm really sorry, I promise I'm going to do better. I promise. I promise. I'm going to make more. The only reason I made this one, to be completely honest with you, is because the customer wanted to see the inside of her computer being built and the individual components. But I'm going to work on it, guys, okay? I'm going to get better at doing these uploads. So thank you for joining today. Have a great rest of your day. If you like this video, maybe check out the other two videos that are coming up here in just a second that are about other builds that I've done in the past.